Refuting Donald Trump on Russian election hacking, the spy chief told lawmakers U.S. intelligence is more certain than ever that cyber attacks against Democratic targets were authorized by the highest levels of the Russian government, meaning President Putin himself. We're back with Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. You had a chance to meet with Rex Tillerson, who's been nominated to become the next Secretary of State, former chairman, CEO of ExxonMobil, who had good relations as ExxonMobil chief with the Russians, got an award from Putin himself. How did your meeting with him go? Did you emerge as someone ready to vote for his confirmation?
Well, I emerged as someone who's looking forward to his confirmation hearing because I asked him a series of tough questions, and I think the American people deserve to hear his answers to those same questions. I centrally focused on whether he understands the key differences between being the CEO of the world's largest oil and gas company and doing business with Putin to try and extract shareholder value, and being Secretary of State and fighting for American values. That means a free press, human rights, democracy. There's a real tension between those two roles, and he argued with me, suggested to me that he had a very good experience in Russia. He has a good business relationship with Putin, but that he sees the difference between these two roles and that he's going to be able to stand up to Putin and he's going to push back on the annexation of Crimea, on the human rights crimes in Aleppo caused by Russia's intervention in Syria, and by his pressing on our NATO allies. I was encouraged by many of the things he said, but it also raised some real tensions with the positions taken by President-elect Donald Trump. And I look forward to asking him in a public confirmation hearing to reconcile what I heard from him with what Donald Trump has said in his campaign and in recent days.
There's an amazing story that's just moved on the Washington Post website, and the headline is U.S. intercepts capture senior Russian officials celebrating Trump win. Apparently, according to this Washington Post report, in the classified document report presented to the president today, which will be presented to the president-elect tomorrow, U.S. intelligence found they had evidence that Russian officials were celebrating Trump's victory in the aftermath of the election. Russian officials congratulated themselves in the outcome. They have intercepts, apparently, of this kind of celebration. I'll read a sentence. The ebullient reaction among high-ranking Russian officials, including some who U.S. officials believe had knowledge of the country's cyber campaign to interfere in the U.S. election, contributed to the U.S. intelligence community's assessment that Moscow's efforts were aimed, at least in part, in helping Trump win the White House. Were you aware of this?
I wasn't aware of that particular intercept, but it fits with a very troubling pattern of activity that the intelligence community relied on to reach the conclusion that this was an intentional act at the highest levels of the Russian government, and it was intended not just to sow concern or a lack of confidence in our election, but to actually skew the results.
Let me read another line from this Washington Post story. Once again, we haven't confirmed it, but I'll share it with you. Other key pieces of information gathered by U.S. spy agencies include the identification of actors involved in delivering stolen Democratic emails to the WikiLeaks website, and disparities in the level of effort Russian intelligence entities devoted to penetrating and exploiting sensitive information stored on Democratic and Republican campaign networks. So they say there were actors, people posing as others, who delivered this information to WikiLeaks. Have you heard about that?
I can't confirm anything I've heard in a classified setting, but I can say that I have real confidence that once President-elect Trump is briefed in detail on what's going to be presented to him, that it would be hard for him to reach any other conclusion than that the Russians intentionally interfered with our election. And that's a direct attack on the United States.
Because this is apparently why General Clapper and other leaders of the U.S. intelligence community are so confident that Russia did engage in this cyber attack against the Democratic National Committee, against the Hillary Clinton campaign, John Podesta's Gmail account, and it's at the heart, according to the Washington Post, of this unprecedented intelligence report that is now being circulated in Washington on a classified basis, presented to the president today, presumably to the president-elect tomorrow. After he hears this directly from the intelligence community, if in fact they have this kind of evidence of intercepted conversations, Russians celebrating the election of Donald Trump, evidence of so-called actors presenting the intercepted communications, emails to WikiLeaks, I don't know how Donald Trump is going to react, but your reaction.
Well, it's been very troubling, Wolf, going back months. This pattern of behavior by now President-elect Trump celebrating Putin, congratulating Putin, talking about wanting a much closer relationship with Russia. And many of us, Republicans and Democrats, have raised real concerns about our lack of understanding of his potential conflicts of interest with Russia. We never got to see President-elect Trump's taxes. We don't know the full reach of his business interests around the world, whether he's got investors in his properties who are Russian, whether he's got ties to the Russians. And in meeting with Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, whom President-elect Trump has chosen to be his Secretary of State and who has a close relationship with Putin, I asked him about his conflicts of interest and his relationships in Russia. I commended him that he's already taken decisive action to sever his ties with ExxonMobil and to release a lot of financial information. And it's my hope that President-elect Trump will see the importance of doing that to dispel any sort of questions about why Russia might have been trying to interfere in our election to favor one candidate over another.
Because if this Washington Post report is accurate, and as I say, we have not independently confirmed him, but if in fact this report, they say it's a 50-page report that was presented to the president today, will be presented to President-elect Trump tomorrow, if in fact the U.S. did intercept communications of Russians celebrating the Donald Trump win, and also intercept communications in which they talked about these cyber attacks, that would be pretty convincing evidence, presumably, to Donald Trump.
That would hopefully be very compelling evidence. And it's my expectation that the president-elect would put America's interests first, and especially after today's hearing in front of the Armed Services Committee, and the very strong voices that he's heard in the House and the Senate from Republicans and Democrats work with us in a bipartisan way to stand up to Putin's attack on Russia and to take stronger steps to make sure that we defend our country from other future cyber attacks.
All right, Senator Coons, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have much more on the breaking news. We'll take a quick break.